Welcome to Unpopular Opinion. We continue our conversation with Mr. Sam Langa, Baba Sam Langa, about African indigenous spirituality, African hidden voices, Revelation Home, spiritual home,
Yes.
and generally about the African spirituality itself. Yes. We were talking about spiritual guides.
Yes.
Can we go into maybe details as to what are these African indigenous spiritual guides? I know we make mention of the likes of Umkhulu Credo Motwa.
Yes.
Quite interesting, there is a lady on TikTok who bash African tradition and spirituality left and right. She's quite a I call her the chief representative of the Christians on that platform.
Yeah.
But then there's one part that she acknowledged that you are not going to defeat these people because in the spirit realm, they have Umkhulu Credo Motwa there representing them or something like that. Please, let's engage around that.
Yeah. Well, remember the concept of spiritual guidance per se, it's actually misunderstood. It's not known simply because of the loss of our spirituality when religions were introduced here in Africa.
Yeah.
So there's a gap between us today and who our ancestors were before colonization.
Yes.
And we must also understand that the major colonization that actually took place in Africa was a religious colonization. This was the major one because of it ripped us off from our spiritual roots and converted us into accepting the Western belief systems.
Yes.
So now it's hard today for people to embrace these spiritual guidance. Hence, we see the likes of Ubabu Credo Mutwa, who was not acknowledged in his existence in Mhlabeni, and whose work was bashed. Some of the people even thought or portrayed Ubabu Credo Mutwa as umtagat. That's because of the concept of spiritual guidance is misunderstood. We can start by first understanding the concept of prophets. According to Western religions, that there's prophets who are God's representatives
On earth.
Yes. But no, these are God's representatives. They deliver the messages of the divine and they have a connection with God, the prophets. And remember, a prophet is a physical person.
Yes.
And now they're saying this physical person has a deep connection with with God, their God. And now, according to African indigenous spirituality and according to spiritual guidance, we are saying these spiritual guidance are physical, central, spiritual beings by whom bambethwe zizithunywa ezikhulu.
Yes.
Izithunywa lezo who are deities carry manje the authority to interact nomdali in matters of izwe lomoya, the upward theory.
Yes.
Whom they deliver those messages through revelations to these spiritual beings, physical, spiritual, central beings. So now, if you can pay attention to some of the characteristics of these religious prophets, you will realize that these concepts were actually stolen here in Africa. Because we always had a spiritual guidance. And one of the terms to deem to tell our spiritual guidance was imboni. Imboni. Hence Ubabu Credo Mutwa wayeboniswa ngezinto zezwe. But now it's different to prophets. Hence there's no indigenous name for prophet. It truly shows that concept was actually Western. They are trying, most of the Christian people, they are trying to what can I say? By suthufatsa ka Sotho. Or no, a prophet ka Sotho ke mo profeta.
No.
But that's not a direct translation.
No. I mean, that is the whole thing with most of the words that we use. We tend to Africanize non-African words.
True.
We tend to even colonized ourselves in the process and putting it in our language.
Yes.
At one time, it was even fancy to say, I did Simo Porofita than to say I saw Sangoma.
Exactly.
Because there was a time when African spirituality, African traditional healing system, African culture was banned.
Yes.
There were laws like the Witchcraft Suppression Act of 1895,
Yes.
Witchcraft Ordinance Act of 1927 and 28 by the British,
Yes.
and Act number 7 of 1952, Witchcraft Suppression Act of South Africa,
Yes.
whereby it created this perception, this concept now that our people are having of Isthunywa,
Exactly.
whereby our healers or imboni zethu went into the church, into the Christian church.
Yes.
And then they come up with this modern concept of Isthunywa, whereby we see that people are talking about ispika, isambato.
Yes.
But when in reality is that when these African spiritual practices were prohibited,
Yes.
people going into the church, they then get to replace the beads that they have
Yes. Yes.
with
Yes.
intambuleza, blue and white and whatever.
Yes.
They go to replace the divination bones or other method that they use to divine or to see or the revelation. They'll then replace it with the Bible. They had that thing of they just open everywhere in the Bible and start to say they are telling you your thing.
Yes.
They then replace imiti and other prescription with the iswasho,
Yes,
and
yes.
they replaced amapai with those speaker and so forth. So you touched up, and they call it Isthunywa.
Yes.
But you touched about Isthunywa. Let's talk about Isthunywa because from the Nguni cosmology,
Yes.
I'll take one, the cosmology of uMenzi, where we talk the Nguni word for mudimu kimenzi, uMenzi wonke, right?
Yes.
And then uMenzi unesithunywa 7, what they call the 7 universal guardian spirits, or isithunywa zikamenzi, which is Ma, which is Umvelinqangi, which is Sodume, which is Nomkhubulwane, which is Nomhoyi, Umlenze Munye. So those are the 7 isithunywa zomoya. They are not necessarily related to anyone alive. They are not your family ancestor, but isithunywa zomoya, like you said, izwe lemoya. They're in the world of spirits.
Yes.
In the Xhosa, we talk of Kamata. And then Ukamata also, there are those isithunywa. Most people don't understand that when you say Kamaku, you talk about isithunywa, a spiritual guide. Isithunywa sokulunga, okhosi, ohele. Isithunywa this, and are not just words to say let it be, or amen, or replacement of amen for those who try to interpret African indigenous spirituality through religious lenses.
Yes.
So, and then you get them even in the Botswana. We talk about Tintibani, we talk about Tobeja, we talk about Mupi, we talk about Luwe, we talk about Matsiye.
Yes.
So you get them all around. So now in the context of what you're saying now, in terms of Isthunywa, can you explain it from African indigenous spirituality and the revelation home, spiritual home?
Okay. Look, yeah, I'll touch on that.
Yeah.
But let me first finish that part of spiritual guides, because
Yes.
it will lead us then to Indaba Yezithunywa.
Isthunywa, okay,
Yes.
okay.
And like we say, ukuthi a spiritual guide, imboni, again, and one of a spiritual guide, guide us again. We through izambulos and Kosomoya, are spiritual kings. But now they differ because of their mandate, one, and their authority through a hierarchy. So imboni are people in the physical world, abambethwe sisithunywa esithize that holds a certain hierarchy and authority in the spiritual dimension, which is also can be identified as a deity, who then are given manje a role to become spiritual guiders in their era Because of it is important that we also distinguish the importance of ukuthi they do not just come at any time or day, but they are sent on a spiritual purpose for a particular era. If, for an example, if you can pay attention to uMbonikazi, uMam Mantsupa. uMantsupa was born in the late 1700s. And if you can pay attention to her journey throughout the 1800s, you will come to learn ukuthi she was sent to become a spiritual guide to a traditional king called uMshweshwe. So through the spiritual guidance of uMbonikazi uMantsupa, Mshweshwe was able to win wars against white imperialists. And again, we learn again ukuthi throughout that period or era kaMantsupa, we also learn ukuthi she was able to pronounce isibonakaliso, a revelation about the coming of a pandemic ethize that came from India that will plague inkomo. And again, in that space, there was famine during that era, whom Mantsupa was able to play a pivotal role to pray and ask for intoni imvula. So these spiritual figures have important roles to play in those eras. Hence, Kosomoya revealed to those eras, they come for every 100 years. To show that Izolo Moya has always been with black people. But the problem is that black people have lost their spiritual identity so much that they are spiritually bankrupt, that they can't identify who is sent in that particular era. Another important spiritual guide is Imboni Untsikana from the Xhosa side. Yes, and I did mention one of his unknown yet most powerful revelations. Isibonakaliso lapho khona ethi umuntu omnyama ufana njengamanzi achithakela angazukubutheka. Meaning that the physical being of umuntu omnyama is into ruins. And the only time we can see the resurrection of umuntu omnyama is through the return of one's identity, which is a spiritual identity. And and then we have now Ubabu Credo Mutwa Imboni, who pronounced, in fact, gave revelations as powerful about known political figures. But they did not listen to him. Exactly. So now you then see ukuthi really isibonakaliso sikaNtsikana siyaphila ku the existence kababu Credo Mutwa, because of they did not embrace Ubabu Credo Mutwa saphila. And this is something that Inkosi Moya always reveals ukuthi when history it's still present, people think ukuthi they are aware of they are making history, but they are not. But they only acknowledge history when it's in the past. So now Imboni Ubabu Credo sekedlulile. We saw people starting to now post about what he has pronounced. Imisebenzi yakhe. He did this, he did that. But why didn't they acknowledge those revelations while besaphila? So the function and purpose of spiritual guiders, Imboni number 1, is to guide Izwe on matters of national importance. And now these spiritual guiders, they have what we call Isthunywa, deities, ezibambethe. And these spiritual deities, Isthunywa, they have direct connection to Umdali. So they carry messages of the spiritual world to the physical world through these spiritual guides. And then another office that is much different to Eyobumboni, because Umboni is a spiritual guide. And again, we have a spiritual king who then has a higher authority, of a spiritual guide, Imboni, who is a spiritual king. Then what is a spiritual king? A spiritual king is a physical, spiritual central figure who holds the highest position. Inkosi Moya is then given the authority to also anoint amakhosi wenyama. And he's also given the the role and responsibility to establish manje what we call a spiritual institution, izwe lomoya.
So basically, what we saw during the coronation of Isilo Samabandla,
Yeah.
the king of the Zulu,
Yes.
the role played by the bishops of the Anglican Church,
Yes.
they actually usurped the role of Inkosi yomoya,
Exactly.
which is to anoint amakhosi according to tradition.
Yes.
Because the king, I studied theology with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
Yes.
I was given a scholarship by the late Abuna Paulos.
Yes.
I was given a 4 years scholarship to study a degree in theology with the Orthodox Church.
Okay.
One of the things I learned then when in the Ethiopian creation story, the book of Jubilee,
Yes.
they make mention of creation in sequence. They talk about 8 things were created on the first day. Actually, first when they say in the beginning was the word,
Yes.
in the beginning was the word, they're going to give the language the word come from, which is basically Ge'ez,
Yes.
which they call it Exabir Kwang Kwang, the language of God.
Yes.
So in there they said this language originally is made up of 22 alphabets.
Yes.
So therefore, God used 8 alphabets on Sunday, 1 on Monday, 3 on Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, 3 on Thursday, 4 on Friday. All of them are 22 to create 22 creations.
Yes.
Now, with the 22 creations being created there, the 8 ones of the first day was the 4 elements, the light, the darkness, the 7 heavens, and the angels.
Okay.
And then I want to zoom into one part of it, which is the angel. Now, with the angels, then they talk about that there are 4 classes of angels.
Okay.
The cherubim, the seraphim, the archangels, and the angels. Now, they say these 4 classes, they then have 9 orders, which is principalities, powers, kings, priests, prophets.
Yes.
These are all heavenly or angelic orders.
Yes.
I'm taking what you are saying to explain it to those who are still stuck up in Christology or in Judeo-Christianity,
Yes.
to give them a grounding and understanding of what we are talking about in their own terms.
Yes.
That the 7, these angels, I'm bringing to the concept of imbon.
Yes.
That it is an angelic order. It's a spiritual order.
Yes.
It's
Highest office.
It's a highest office in the spiritual world.
Yes.
On earth. Is representing the highest mandate on earth, which is umdali.
Yes.
So that is why they have the powers to anoint amakhosi,
Yes.
because obukhosi
Spiritual
is
kings.
they're spiritual kings.
Yes.
who have the powers to anoint the physical kings.
Yes.
Which kingship itself is a spiritual thing.
Yes.
Because the king must represent the spiritual culture of his people.
Yes.
And which is the problem we're having with our kings today, that they are either Christian or they are part of political parties.
True.
And in an African traditional system, the king cannot be a Christian or a Muslim or a member of any political party.
True.
He should represent the indigenous spirituality of his ancestors who established that kingship. And that is why Inkosi yomoya, Imboni, is important in the anointment of the king.
Exactly.
And then you had Ustai during Shaka Zulu,
Yes.
during the days of Oshak, Ilembe.
Yes.
And then you had Abu Morena Mutloli was also advisor for
Basotho
King
side,
Moshoeshoe,
yes.
Basotho side.
Yes.
And then you had Bukimpa Vinta.
Kimpa Vinta.
When you're going up now, Angola,
Simon
Congo,
Kimbangu.
Sam Kimbangu,
Yes.
you know, those were our
Yeah.
imboni, our spiritual guides.
Yes. And to touch on that, there's look, in Inkosi yomoya, Babuzilezwe,
Yeah.
recently in May, we saw a spiritual historical moment whereby a traditional king was anointed by a spiritual king. Inkosi yabathethwa, uMelizwe,
Yes.
was anointed by Inkosi yomoya.
Yes.
Lest we forget ukuthi ukhokho wakhe odingiswayo, he sought for refuge kubani? Ukhokho ka Babu Zilezo, uBhungane.
Ubungane kanzela.
So the history is repeating itself, showing us ukuthi really lento asiyona into entsha,
Yeah.
into yokhokho bethu.
Yes.
And to show that really, African indigenous spirituality has always played a pivotal role in every facet of our lives. You also see, Uguti, we see some of the kings, known kings like in South Africa, who were anointed by the Western religions. It truly shows, Uguti, really, that concept of a spiritual king and a traditional king, it's a concept that originates in Africa. And that has been achieved. And then there's Isbonagaliso, a revelation that was pronounced by Usamon Kimbangu in his era in Congo. And I like to distinguish Lento Gakulu because of Amahlubi, Bakhamga Gupi, e Congo. And now a Imboni from a Congo now gives manje a pronouncement to there's going to be a spiritual king that will emerge. And that particular spiritual king, he will carry three powerful gifts, which is the spiritual power, the scientific power, and the political power. And will recognize the spiritual king by writing the book. And now, through validating manje, such as Bonagaliso, Salo, Imboni, was a Congo, Simon Kimbangu. And we came to evidence of he was complimenting the coming of Babu Zilezo because of Amakosomo, where they complement each other. Today, the very first person who wrote about the original spirituality, which is African indigenous spirituality, Babu Zilezo. And he carries these three gifts because of he advises in terms of science, he advises in terms of, he guides, in fact, in terms of spirituality and also politics. Because of, remember, politics, it's something that also stems from our traditions. We had our own politics.
Yes. Our indigenous politics.
Exactly. So, again, to also add about Amakosomo and Imboni complementing each other. Ubabu Mutwa has had in his era, wahlangana no Babu Uzilezwe, passing now the baton to say Babu Zilezwe embiza manje ngomvezi indaba umthethi wamaqiniso to say you are the one now in this era giving the baton to carry on manje guiding isizwe, because of people are now spiritually bankrupt so much that kunzima to carry the load yomhlaba. Hence, we see now the rise of depression and suicide. It's because of people are spiritually bankrupt. And they're resorting to religion as an scapegoat to find to fill the void. So the role of spiritual kings in this era and also Mandulo was to guide Izizwe through messages that come from Izwe Lomoya. And they do so by the incarnation of Idalo, which is deities. Hence, you spoke about the important role of Isthunywa. Isthunywa holds the highest office based on the hierarchy, who carries messages from Umdali. Hence, the term he must call Umdali as Umfihlakalo because of Umdali, he continues to become a mystery to human beings. Agabonwa. So in spirituality, you can never know everything, like religion says. Religion has answers to everything.
But the spirituality can never know. In Spain, in the language of the Bapedi, there is a saying that
Exactly.
God is unknown and unknowable.
Yes.
And of course, we go back to ancient Kemet. When you say Amen, which are other attributes of Amen, means the hidden one.
The hidden one, yes.
The unknown one.
The mysterious
one. The mysterious one.
Yes.
Hence, in Africa, we never fought over religion. We don't have any instance where they say Africans fought over God. Because we have always understood that when you come to God, you're talking about divine mystery.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, speaking in that context, there are some will be throwing questions around and be saying, where was God, our African God or God as we know him, in Fihlakalo during colonialism and slavery?
It's a very good question. Because of now, the question stems manje to say, did Africa start a few years or few decades before the introduction of colonization?
No. Colonialism and slavery is not our history. It interrupted our history.
Exactly.
Our history goes back to timeless immemorial.
Exactly. So now people are asking Guti, Bebe Kona. Remember, I just given you one of them. I gave you Babu Mutwa during the apartheid era in South Africa. He was there. He was revealing imfihlo zasezweni lomoya, but people paid less attention to. Namhlanje we have Inkosi yomoya uBaba uZilezo. People are calling him a cult. And if you can pay attention to the concept of a cult, it comes from irreligion. You know, when irreligion, it's one-sided. Anything that does not make sense to them, it's demonic.
It's demonic.
It's cult.
It's cult.
But now when it comes to African indigenous spirituality, everything goes in two ways. Hence siyazi ukuthi kunamadlozi amahle namadlozi amabi. Kunemimoya emihle nemimoya engalungile. That is why mawuphahla ngesimo sedlozi awuphahli wonke amadlozi. Mayenza umsebenzi wenza isiko uphahlela kabantu abadala abahlambulukile, because of the moment uphahla you're opening manje a channel of wena physically to izwe lomoya. Anyone can come. Because of the people who have passed on to the spiritual world. Some of them were not pure at the time they lived in their existence in Khabeni. So the moment when you call everyone, everyone then comes to you. Ugcina sokunamathela yilaba bebe-rape, bebebamba inkunzi, bebenza konke okubi. Because of wena, you don't have spiritual wisdom to understand ukuthi when you call upon in a form of uphahla, you only call upon the good side of his spirituality. So it takes us back to say that question by which people always ask ukuthi umdali beke kuphi? He has always been there. Amakhosi omoya have always been sent ezweni lenyama. Because of the loss of our spiritual wisdom, we can't even identify, even today, those who are sent. We can't even identify those who are telling the truth. We can't even identify whether this one was actually sent, because of we lack even the criteria by which we need to use in order to distinguish the truth from the false. Our ancestors gave in to religion. Some of them were forced. Some of them were murdered. Because of it was something that was forced into us. Hence the conversion. In African indigenous spirituality, there's no such a thing as conversion. Remember, conversion, it's something that when you convert into your something that is not yours, it's foreign. So if we had embraced our spiritual identities at the time these people came and recognized our spiritual leaders. Remember, Inkosi Moya always says that everyone ufuna ukuphatha, like politics. You know why politics is failing? Everyone wants to prove a point by leading. I can provide a better service than the others, and then we come running, supporting this one. Because of no one wants to follow the proper channels. So, okay, lo uthunyiwe, masimamele. Uthini lo muntu. And if you can pay attention, religion does not allow people to do researches. Hence, I embrace you to say, you're doing a great job by researching. There's no research in religion. Religion tells you what you need to believe. Hence, I said, there's a difference between belief and knowing. You are told to believe and have faith on something you do not understand. But in African indigenous spirituality, you have to research. There's e-research organization that Inkosi Moya started so that the world can see that he's not hiding anything here. You can even take what he says and go further and research to validate his authenticity. So people say, where was Umdali? And again, they say, where was God? Again, they're using the religious term to identify their African God, Umdali. So you see, we are even governed by a vocabulary of irreligion to try and understand our own self.
And speaking in spelling, you're casting out spells.
Exactly.
So when you say God, you are bringing in another foreign entity, spiritual entity, because it exists. It does not necessarily exist in a good way, but it exists as something that comes from a particular cultural context.
Yes.
Like, for instance, God comes from the Norse and the Scandinavian mythology, which is basically all witches, all wizards, all Wiccas. When they are put together, it's called God, Goma Osduba, G-O-D. So you are invoking something foreign. But this is where also it becomes problematic that the colonizers in translation, you can't translate a name. Ulanga in any language. But when the colonizers come with a god here, call him Jesus. And then when he meet Botswana, he become Mudimu. When he meet the Xhosa, he become Kamata. When he meet Matsonga, he become Shikwembo.
Yes.
You know, now it showed the mischievousness that what type of entity is this that is so chameleon-like, that
Yes.
it take on the shape and images of the other. But it was purely to use something that is familiar with us to introduce something that is foreign,
Yes.
which was the foreign religion. Hence, you find that the missionaries, they were very clear. They targeted Amakosiwet.
Exactly.
They targeted our kings to convert the king so that the kings can convert the nation. Because if you have converted the king will just give a royal decree. From now on, everybody, like there is a story from the Kebranegas, the Ethiopian holy book,
Yes.
about the conversation of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And after Solomon converted the Queen of Sheba, Queen of Ethiopia, when she go back to her country, the first decree was like, from now on, you no more worship what you were worshiping. We are going to worship the God of Israel. And I always point out that that was the beginning of the colonization of Africa through religion. That was 3,000 years ago, before the missionaries of 200 years ago. That they used the higher authority in your society to convert you. They use the higher authority in your spiritual world. The word Mudimu, Ramasedi, Shikwembo, and say Ramasedi, Mudimu, Shikwembo is Jesus.
Yes.
Now, how can this one entity be all of that? Yeah. And then because of they are throwing around monotheism, and as if you subscribe to monotheism, you are a true believer.
Yes.
And therefore, you have to say God is one. And then you are incorporating this one foreign God into your many different understanding of God,
yes,
which is facilitation of colonialism.
Yes.
So now there is something that also came out of this question when you answering the question here, or clarifying this concept of where was Umdali, exactly, which is basically to say there's always been Umdali and there's always been a Isthunywa.
Yes.
There was always been messengers Umdali to keep the people in their right path.
Yes.
But then the people chose the other way.
Yeah. But they just on that point, they abandoned their spiritual guidance.
Yes.
And now the consequences of that, it's what unfolded.
Yeah.
So the more we don't listen to these spiritual guidance, the worse we are going to behave. Exactly.
And this is the part where most activists undermine the role played by foreign religions.
Yes.
Most, whether they are Pan-Africanists, African nationalists, Black conscious, they undermine the role played by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in our colonization, in our enslavement, in giving expression to imperialism.
Yes.
That most of us, we don't understand that the first institution that was destroyed during colonization is the institution of African indigenous spirituality.
True.
And today we're trying to regain our self through politics instead of through African indigenous spirituality, like reclaim our spirit back. And then our African indigenous spirituality will then guide our politics, will then guide our economics, like we talk about economic freedom.
Yes.
But it was the point of gaining economic freedom if we're going to consume like Westerners.
Yes.
If we're going to engage in Western consumerism and Western crass materialism and all, as what we are seeing now with our politicians and advocates of this political freedom and economic freedom in the absence of spiritual guidance, where is it leading again? So we need to look at the total liberation, the total freedom, and beginning with the fact that an African is a spiritual being. So he needs to center himself with his African indigenous spirituality.
Yes. And on that point, remember what happened in 1994 when we first got our political freedom. Our parents were so excited. We were ecstatic that finally, sesikhululekile. Not so khululeka. Sesikhululekile. That was the perception. But 30 years later, the question begs, Are we free?
And we find that we are not free.
Yes. And
because they nonsensify the freedom by giving us few things that freedom means voting regularly.
Exactly.
Freedom means going to the same toilet with the same people who used to refuse us to go to the same toilet with
Yes.
them. Freedom means now can buy in the same shop.
Yes.
Freedom means you can marry the women that they did not allow us to marry
Yes.
under the Immorality Act. So they reduced freedom they nonsensify it. They reduce it into small something, and 30 years later we realize that we are not.
Yes. And then on that point, I also want to also put to light that the role of the existence or acknowledging your spiritual identity, which comes strongly by embracing the African indigenous spirituality, it's for spiritual growth. Spiritual growth.
Yes.
There's the growth of your spirit.
Yes.
And that's something many people overlook. That it's not enough to only practice spirituality on the basis of spiritual rituals and learning about the past. It's also about gaining spiritual maturity in your spirit through the spiritual revelation teachings. That is why spiritual kings and also inborn spiritual guiders are playing a huge pivotal role.
Yeah.
That is why they deem spiritual institutions as kulayo, like Revelation Spiritual Home as a cult. But they don't understand the function of a spiritual institution of an individual. That is why Black people, they resort today in politics as today's saviors. The great priests today are politicians today.
Yes.
They are preaching in their pulpits to say, no, come to me.
Yeah.
But they don't understand that the very people who are voting are experiencing a spiritual bankruptcy, a spiritual void. Because of they are leaning much into politics, thinking politics will give them what they need. And what is important to highlight here is that what is physical, it's less important.
Yeah.
Hence, Life Omuntu has a birth date and a death date. But now, in that space that you are given, are we here to fulfill our political interests? Are we here to fulfill our personal desires? There's more into such. And now, through African indigenous spirituality, we learn leon. Yokuthi sila also ukuzokhulisa umoya. Umoya melukhule through spiritual experiences of imfihlo zomoya, because of in spirituality we understand ukuthi the flesh is temporal while the spirit is infinite. It's permanent. So upuma from an infinite space, which is a spiritual world, venturing into a physical world, given an opportunity to establish yourself also spiritually, and then uphinde ubuyele. So imagine if ubuyele ungakakhuli emoyeni, what type of spirit are you going to be? That is why ubona ukuthi many people are saying, hey, mina abantu abadala bangivelele. Hey, mina abantu abadala bavela kabi. It's because of manje le era lapho khona kwafika colonization, it disturbed our spiritual maturity. It disturbed our spirituality so much that ababuyela ezweni lomoya babuyela manje sebengcolile, meaning now they are babuyela with indoctrinations coming from the Western beliefs.
Actually, speaking on that, in some of the studies where that is being thrown around, when they speak of the world of the departed. First, let me touch the part you were talking about. It was Elish and it was Eli.
Yes.
That is why the rites of burial are part of the process of helping the soul to transcend into the other world.
True.
Then there will be those rituals that hamba ube it was Elish.
Yes.
Because they're making a clear distinction between it was Elibi and it was Elish.
Yes.
So, and then the second part of it is that there is the living and the living dead.
Yes.
Now, the living dead are the most recently departed spirits.
Yes.
Now, these most recently departed spirits have not fully made transition.
Yes.
That is why they will come back with the confusion of Western religion and say, kufuneka isambatho, kufuneka isiphika, ube ne-cross, kufuneka iBhayibheli. But this is a spirit that has not fully transitioned, and therefore it is still conflicted.
Yes.
It hasn't been completely ihlambululwe
Yes.
and ibuyele emandulo.
Yes.
Or ibuyele to the spirit world in its purest sense before it was corrupted by colonization.
Yes.
and missionary religion.
Yes. And to touch on the part important that you just highlighted, inhlambuluko.
Yeah.
Yeah, inhlambuluko ihlukile.
Yeah.
You see, there's inhlambuluko religion whereby they say you need to convert to be born again.
Yeah.
You see, now leonto it creates a perception ukuthi African indigenous spirituality ngcolile.
Yeah.
It's impure. Because of now you converting to a certain religion that says for you to be accepted as pure and holy and have the Holy Spirit, you need to be converted or undergo a conversion through baptism. But now, according to African indigenous spirituality, in Tlambuluko, it's different. And this is why ubona ukuthi even in Tlambuluko yobungoma yedlozi ayifani neNtlambuluko yesithunywa. Hence we need spiritual kings and guiders because of they provide intlambuluko yomoya. That is why you see, let me make a practical example, and I wish ukuthi we can pursue that as a research. What happens to people who live impilo wrong? And what happens to people who depart from this world to the spiritual world, having to inherit a doctrine of the Western civilization, the Western religion? Those people, imimoya yabo, they take the form of how they used to live. So now you see, ufika emhlabeni so innocent. You receive religion from your parents or from influence of your friends, masokula or whatsoever, and then you leave this world having to become a Christian. As well, no more you become a Christian, but your original ancestors who did not undergo the conversion abazukufuna because of wena awukho right for this part. Manje umoya wakho manje wenzani uyakhala ugcina ukhalela kulabo baphila ukuthi ngicela uhambe uyongeza kubabuzilezo. We have spiritual experiences whereby people from the spirit world who undergone i-conversion ye-religion, they come back through their children to say hamba kwaHadebe sizokhona ukugeza. Hence ngisho kuwe ukuthi inhlambuluko yesithunywa ayifani nenhlambuluko yedlozi. Ngisho nedlozi liyakhona ukuthi kube lidlozi elinesikhwama lidlulisele kumntana waso, but nalo in his or her existence esaphila uthola ukuthi one was able to inherit a religion yase-West. That person needs to also undergo inhlambuluko. And then people will come and say, but I did dream umama wami ethi yena wayesonta kuphi kuphi, therefore because of lithongo leli, then I deem it as authentic. It's not.
We actually, if you worship the God of the enemy of your ancestors, you become your ancestors' enemy.
Exactly.
So we have a saying, this is within our Bantu Soul Society Institute. We have a saying which characterizes a stage. It's a psychological, spiritual state.
Yes.
But also when we were reasoning with Imboni yesterday, he also gave a complementary statement to this, saying that there is a stage between when you're moving from Christianity to Africanity. There is a stage we refer to it as post-traumatic Christian syndrome.
Yes.
Now, this post-traumatic Christian syndrome is one which most of our people are suffering from.
Yes.
Even when they're getting into these African spirituality spaces, they're still coming up with the hangovers of that.
Exactly, the religious dogma.
Religious dogma and doctrine that came with colonization.
Yes.
So, and therefore it created Africans to be schizophrenic. It creates spiritual psychosis.
Yes.
Whereby we find our people are spiritually conflicted.
Yes.
They are double talking. They're suffering from double consciousness.
Yes.
You know, one leg is in Africa, the other leg is in Jerusalem.
Exactly.
You know, so it is very important that you mentioned the issue of inhlambuluko.
Yes.
Because we need to purify as we're returning to our source.
Yes.
In its purest sense.
Yes, and we can take that process of inhlambuluko, the process of purification, of the restoration of an African indigenous spiritual identity by terming it as the unlearning and relearning. So we unlearning the Western belief systems and ideologies, and relearning manje the knowledge of knowing that comes through izambulo imfundiso zezambulo, the revelation teachings. Hence I say it is important that not only should we embrace the past about African indigenous spirituality, but also in the present moment we need to also embrace the existence of these physical spiritual central figures who play a pivotal role in growing the spirit. Because of once your spirit it's growing, it's maturing through the spiritual foods, you are able to interact politically, you are able to interact economically, you are able to understand izinto in the context of imfihlo.
Yes.
And this is where now you see ukuthi most people who are championing the growth of the spirit, they understand most of the things of ilendo. And even the concept of there's this phrase abathanda ukuyisebenzisa ukuthi jack of all trades, master of none. Let me tell you, spiritually we have jack of all trades. You know why? Because of spirit is light, and when it grows, you are able to champion anything that which you need to master. Look at the concepts of these cartoons, like the Dragon Ball Z, those cartoons that are superhuman. This concept originates from us because of we were superhuman. So the moment you embrace the spiritual growth, you enter into a phase of reaching your fullest potential. So if you say, I have reached my fullest potential as a human being, that means when first you have restored your spiritual identity. Nothing on this earth will defeat you. And I'm not talking about perfection here. There's no perfection in Mhlabeni. But now we're talking about now understanding the key fundamentals of now having these spiritual revelations, growing your spirit. Because of you have an eternal life ahead of you. So if you don't engage in growing your spirit, how will you then engage spiritually? Another important key to understand is when people we've seen people who commit suicide. Let me tell you, mawuzibulala according to imfundiso zenkosi yomoya, you are cutting short isikhathi izwe lomoya have given you. And you will then remain in a certain spiritual dimension up until isikhathi sakho sokwamkelwa comes. So people who take impilo zabo, they are not welcome in the spiritual world. Hence many, they come through their families to say, ngicela ukuyogezwa ngoba angamkelekwanga kokithi. You see, so you see, there's the difference between inhlambuluko yesithunywa eza through spiritual guides and also inhlambuluko yobungoma. Ngoba nobungoma kumele buhlambuluke. That is why we see now people can't even distinguish between isangoma esihlambulukile lesingahlambulukanga. How can isangoma esihlambulukile sikhanda umuthi obulalayo? How can uthi wena unengulo obungoma but yet uye wahamba wayothwala? Phela when mawuthwala, it's like taking something that is foreign to your ancestors and then we let it in. So create umbango manje. So kahle religion, it's more or less isithwalo kuthi, because of now we're taking something that is not ours and make it ours. That is why there's conflict of interest. Again, why there's so much tribalism and racism? It's because of Black people have not understood that Eyonanto that makes us one, it's our spiritual identity. It's not our cultures. It's not our languages. It's our spiritual identity. And once you are spiritually inclined and you are growing spiritually, you will understand one thing here, that you and I are common first because of we are spiritual beings. That is why Nkosi Moya says, spirit is thicker than blood. There are family members who can actually go bayokuhlanganela imithi intontoni or bakubulala. That is why spirit is thicker than blood. You and I, sihlomene because of singabantu bomoya. Singabantu bomoya, siyazwana. That is why you see ukuthi there's a huge division la. Hence, we can't even fight our own battle against white colonization or land expropriation. Because of now we're saying, no, we are South Africans. How do you identify yourself as a South African? How do you identify yourself as a Zimbabwean? How do you... It's because of we have not reached our fullest potential as spiritual beings to say we can only expropriate this land by first acknowledging that as African people, we are spiritually inclined, and what makes us common is spirituality.
So basically what we are saying here is that we share spiritual unity.
Yes.
When we talk of African spirituality, we're talking about that African spiritual unity that we share in common.
Yes.
What is being able to be established in this conversation is one that is to do away with the misconception that once people are getting out of colonial religion and are making claims of African spirituality, they start to tell you that nobody teaches African spirituality. You don't need anybody to show you African spirituality.
True.
And I always say this is a rebelliousness that is born out of, you are rebelling from this colonial control system. And then you are getting into some nihilism of some sort. And therefore you don't understand and recognize that even in this realm, there are spiritual guides.
Yes, it takes us back to the most important point you've raised. Uguti, although people are trying so much to accept African indigenous spirituality, but they are still trapped mentally.
Yes.
You see, because of they have not undergone fully the transformation of returning back. Because of it's not enough to only practice rituals of the spirit, but it is important to grow the spirit to also get rid of religion in the mind. Because of that is why we have people who say, nah, but it's because of mental slavery again. Because of it, colonization also played a role again in mental slavery.
So we must stop using colonial religious concepts in order to define African spiritual phenomena.
And we must also accept that African indigenous spirituality does have spiritual guidance.
Yes.
We have guidance.
Yes.
We must accept that.
Yes.
There's always a teacher in a classroom.
It's not a free-for-all.
It's not a free-for-all.
Yeah. And more especially that we are coming from a condition of colonization and enslavement.
Exactly.
Whereby institutions were established to suppress this African indigenous spiritual knowledge. So you have to be guided. But anyway, it is African. That is everything in the society have a guiding hand.
Yes. Look, again, the history of our spirituality, it's a knowledge that you can take in mentally. But what about your spirit? You see, that is why I'm saying spiritual knowledge through revelation teachings, it grows your spirit to even enhance our history. But it's not enough only to know the history of what our spirituality was. Hence, people come with the notion of anyone can be spiritual. So you can't be spiritual with one element. You can't be spiritual by being isangoma nje kuphela noma igedla or whatsoever. You can't be spiritual by only saying mina ngiyathakazela. It's not enough. What is to be spiritual? It's when you have restored your spiritual identity. And this is most important. Not only do spiritual guiders come to deliver message of national importance for the nation, but they also form part of our day-to-day life, so that they can help us reach our fullest potential by embracing our spiritualities. So hence I say to you that people want to engage on spiritual matters mentally. And that's a huge problem.
Spirituality is reality.
Exactly.
If you don't deal with reality, you don't deal with spirituality.
Exactly. Because if we were to argue right now about one spiritual matter, I would always ask you to who is or what is the source of the information when you see, that's the difference. People, we need to reason as Black people. And critical thinking, analytical thinking has always been what we used to be.
Yes.
But today we no longer become analytical.
And critical.
No, this person he's running a spiritual institution and kunabantu abaningi uthwele.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah.
you talk like a person only caller. You see how damaging belief is. You end up believing in something you yourself uyayibona ukuthi ayikho. No, uthwele uyazi kanjani? Your friend buys a new car, gets married, has an established business. Hayi uthwele. Because of you knew him 2 years back, engenalutho namhlanje uthwele.
Umboni said,
Where's proof?
Yeah. Umboni said in your research unit, which is quite good, that
Yes.
there is a research that is taking place
Yes.
in the knowledge aspect of this spiritual expression.
Yes.
And then he said one of the research that is being established by African Hidden Voices is that the religion damage your
prefrontal cortex.
prefrontal cortex.
Yes, and now it has become a program, a mindset program. Because of now, we also need to decolonize the mind. And why do we say that? It's because of the moment you convert into a religion, it turns you into what they term as scholars and neurologists, a religious fundamentalist. Awufuna ukuzwa next. When what uJesu ukhona, uJesu.
Yeah, that's it.
You don't want to engage in anything. No. It ends there. No, you don't do that.
Yeah.
So that means your prefrontal cortex has been damaged.
Yeah.
You need to first listen to a person in order to engage. And now this program, your mindset, is able to assist you then to overcome such and restoring your prefrontal cortex, because of this is where now your critical thinking takes place, your analytical thinking takes place. That is why the existence of two distinctive parts in our research organization, where we have the qualitative research and analysis and the quantitative research and analysis, where I now partake into now the critical part of using quantitative analysis to validate what is deemed as non-existent. And through facts, we are able to come up with factual insights to support that. Please.
Dango Siyabonga. This is a unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Conversation between Thau Haramanuba and Mr. Sam Langa.
Yes.
Post-traumatic Christian disorder is a serious problem.
Yes.
Prefrontal cortex is damaged.
Yes.
So let us repair, let us reconstruct, let us decolonize and return to our African indigenous spirituality. Thank you so much for gracing this platform with your presence and for sharing much needed knowledge. We have to decolonize. It's a must. We don't have any choice. Thank you.
Thank you.